The empty chairs accused him nightly. Samuel Miller set 4 plates with mechanical precision, though 3 would remain untouched. 7 years hadn't dulled this ritual, laying silver for ghosts, pouring coffee for shadows. The coal oil lamp flickered across dust sheets that shrouded his wife Margaret's chair, the smaller ones that once held James and Catherine. Outside, winter pressed against the ranch house windows. His cattle were secured, Atlas fed and stabled. Town lay 8 miles east, but it might as well have been across an ocean. He'd made his monthly supply run yesterday, dodging Martha's questions, Sheriff Burrell's concerned glances. The cast-iron stove crackled. Samuel opened Margaret's Bible, not reading, just holding. The pages smelled of her lavender soap, now fading like everything else. His world had shrunk to these routines: tend cattle, avoid town, set the table for the dead. Tonight felt different, though. Tonight, the wind carried the sound of something impossible. A knock. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. The abandoned barn offered little protection from the cold. Clara Hayes pulled the worn quilt tighter around her children, feeling Emma shiver against her left side while Thomas burrowed deeper into her right shoulder. His small body radiated heat, too much heat. She pressed her lips to his forehead, confirming what she feared. The fever had started. "Mama, my feet hurt," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind whistling through the broken boards. "I know, sweetheart." Clara examined her daughter's copper-toed boots. The leather cracked and thin. They'd walked 15 miles since dawn, staying off the main roads. Just a little longer. She reached into her carpet bag, fingers finding the false bottom she'd sewn years ago at her husband David's insistence. The deed was still there, along with their marriage certificate and the children's birth records. Above the hidden compartment, her worldly possessions: $3 in coins, 2 pieces of hard tack, a strip of jerky, and David's pocket watch stopped the day he died. $3. It might buy them passage on tomorrow's stage. But not far enough. Not beyond Marcus Thornton's reach. Clara closed her eyes, remembering that morning 3 weeks ago. She'd been kneading bread when Thornton arrived with 2 men, his black carriage pristine despite the muddy roads. Sheriff Burrell had stood behind him, uncomfortable but present. "Mrs. Hayes," Thornton had said, removing his hat with mock courtesy, "I've come about your husband's debts." "David had no debts," she'd replied, hands still covered in flour. Thornton produced papers. $600, borrowed against next year's harvest. His signature's right here. The signature was wrong. David made his letters sharp and precise, not the flowery script on Thornton's document. But Sheriff Burrell wouldn't meet her eyes, and she understood. Thornton owned half the county's mortgages and the sheriff's loyalty. "You can work it off," Thornton had continued, his smile predatory. "You and the children. I'm generous, only 7 years' service. Room and board provided, of course. Debt bondage. Legal slavery dressed in prettier words." She'd nodded, asked for time to prepare, then grabbed what mattered the moment they left. The children thought it was an adventure at first. Now, 3 days later, Emma understood they were running. Thomas just wanted his own bed. "Mama," Emma's voice broke through the memory. "Are we going to have a home again?" Clara's throat tightened. Through a gap in the barn wall, she spotted smoke rising from a chimney perhaps a mile distant. The only sign of life they'd seen for hours. Samuel Miller's ranch, if she remembered correctly from David's mentions. A man who kept to himself. David had said, a man nursing some deep wound. Thomas moaned in his sleep, his fever climbing. Emma's teeth chattered despite the quilt. Clara counted the coins again, $3, as if wishing might multiply them. The darkness was deepening, the cold becoming dangerous. Her children needed warmth, food, safety. She could continue running, hope to reach the next town by dawn. But Thomas's fever might not wait that long. Emma's feet were already bleeding through her stockings, and Thornton's men would check the stage stops first. Or she could knock on that distant door, Trust a stranger's kindness. Risk everything on the smoke from that chimney promising warmth, the lamplight in the window suggesting someone who hadn't yet shut out the world completely. Clara gathered her children. "We're going to ask for help?" "What if they're mean?" Emma asked. "Practical even at 8. "Then we'll leave," Clara promised, though she knew they had nowhere else to go. "But sometimes, sweetheart, people surprise you with kindness." Thomas stirred, opening his fever-bright eyes. "Mama, cold." "I know. My love. We're going to find somewhere warm." She lifted Thomas, staggering slightly under his weight. 4 years old, but tall for his age like his father had been. Emma grabbed the carpet bag and quilt without being asked, her small face set with determination that broke Clara's heart. They left the barn, walking toward that distant light. Each step was an act of faith. The wind cut through Clara's thin calico dress, the fabric worn nearly transparent at the elbows and hem. She'd pawned her good dress 2 days ago for food money. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The ranch house grew larger as they approached. Well maintained. She noticed. The fence posts straight, the barn solid, a man who took care of things. But would he care for strangers? Clara stopped at the gate, seeing the lamplight clearer now through the front window. A figure moved inside a man, alone, sitting at a table. She watched him rise, move to the stove, return, the ordinary movements of a solitary evening. "Mama!" Emma tugged her sleeve. Clara looked down at her children. Emma, trying so hard to be brave. Thomas, burning with fever. They deserved better than running. They deserved a chance. She walked to the door, raised her hand, and knocked. The sound seemed to echo forever in the cold night air. Inside. The movement stopped. A long pause, as if the man couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. Then footsteps, slow and uncertain, approaching the door. Samuel Miller stood frozen, his hand halfway to the door latch. No one knocked anymore, not for 7 years. The wind, perhaps, a loose board striking the frame. But no, there it came again, weak but deliberate. 3 small raps that might have been a bird pecking, except birds didn't come calling after dark. He set down Margaret's Bible and moved toward the door, his stockinged feet silent on the pine boards. The kerosene lantern on the side table cast his shadow long and wavering against the wall. His hand hesitated on the latch. What if it was trouble? But trouble didn't knock politely. Trouble kicked doors down. Samuel opened the door. A woman stood there, swaying like wheat in a storm. Her calico dress was so thin he could see her trembling through it, the fabric worn nearly transparent at the elbows. She held a small boy against her shoulder, his head lolling with fever sleep. Beside her, a girl of perhaps 8 clutched a carpet bag and a quilt, her chin raised despite the exhaustion written across her young face. "Please," the woman said, and her knees buckled. Samuel caught her elbow instinctively, steadying her before she could fall. The boy in her arms stirred, moaning softly. Up close, Samuel could see the fever flush on the child's cheeks, the dry lips that spoke of too many hours without water. "Come in," he heard himself say. "Come inside before the cold takes you." The woman's eyes, gray as winter storm clouds, met his. Pride warred with desperation in their depths. "We don't mean to impose. Just tonight. The children." "Come in," Samuel repeated, firmer now. He guided her through the doorway, the girl following close behind. The warmth of the house seemed to hit them like a physical force. The woman swayed again, and Samuel took the boy from her arms without asking. The child weighed almost nothing, bird bones and fever. "Sit," he said, indicating the horsehair sofa. "I'll heat some milk." The woman sank onto the sofa as if her strings had been cut. The girl settled beside her, still clutching their meager belongings. Samuel carried the boy to his own chair by the stove, the one with the best heat, and settled him carefully. The child's eyes opened briefly, brown like his mother's, Not gray, and a small hand reached out, finding Samuel's weathered fingers. "Papa," the boy whispered. "No, child. Rest now." Samuel's voice came out rougher than intended, scraped raw by sudden memory. James had been about this age when the fever took him. He moved to the stove, muscle memory guiding him through motions he'd thought forgotten. The Dutch oven was still good for warming milk. He used it occasionally for himself, though he couldn't remember why he'd kept it. From the pantry, he retrieved the milk jug, grateful he'd bought fresh that morning in town. As it heated, he found the old quilts from the trunk in the back room, the ones Margaret had made that he couldn't bear to throw away but couldn't bear to look at either. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked, returning with an armload of blankets. "Clara Hayes." Her voice was steadier now, though exhaustion pulled at every word. "These are my children, Emma and Thomas." Samuel nodded, wrapping a quilt around the boy, Thomas, who had curled into the chair like a cat seeking warmth. The girl, Emma, watched him with eyes that seemed too knowing for her years. Her gaze traveled the room, taking in the dust sheets on the chairs, the yellow daguerreotype on the mantel, the table still set for 4. "Why are those chairs sleeping?" she asked, pointing at the dust-covered furniture. The question hit Samuel like a physical blow. He turned away, busying himself with the milk. "They're not being used just now." "Like they're waiting," Emma said softly. "We had to cover our furniture too, when we left, to keep it safe until we come back." "Emma," her mother said gently, "don't trouble Mr. Miller," Samuel supplied. "Samuel Miller. And it's no trouble." He poured warm milk into 3 cups, his hands remembering the motion of serving children. "The boy needs to drink. Fight that fever." Clara rose unsteadily and took the cup. Moving to where Thomas rested, she coaxed him awake, helped him sip. The domestic scene was so familiar, so foreign, that Samuel had to turn away. His eyes landed on Emma, who had picked up Margaret's Bible from where he'd set it down. "My papa had one like this," she said, tracing the worn leather cover. "He read to us every night." She looked up at Samuel, and something in her gaze made him stop breathing. "You have kind eyes like Papa did. Sad, but kind." Samuel's chest constricted. He wanted to retreat, to maintain the walls he'd built so carefully. But Thomas had finished his milk and was looking at him with fever-bright eyes, one small hand extended. Without thinking, Samuel took it. The child's fingers were so hot, so small. "You're very tall," Thomas said solemnly. "Like a tree." Despite himself, Samuel felt his mouth twitch toward a smile, muscles he'd thought atrophied. "Trees are good for climbing." "I can climb," Thomas informed him, though his eyelids were already drooping. "Papa taught me." "Your papa sounds like a good man," Samuel said carefully. "He died," Emma said matter-of-factly, though her chin trembled. "The fever took him, like Thomas has now. But Thomas will get better. Mama promised." Clara's hand went to her daughter's shoulder, and Samuel saw her fingers tremble. The pearl buttons on her collar caught the lantern light, fine buttons on a dress worn to threads. A woman who'd known better days. "I can pay," Clara said suddenly. "Not much, but—" "No need," Samuel interrupted. "The child needs rest and warmth. That's payment enough." It wasn't what he'd meant to say. He'd meant to establish boundaries, to make it clear this was temporary, one night only. But Thomas's hand in his was so trusting, and Emma's eyes held such hope. And Clara's desperate dignity reminded him of Margaret trying to be strong when James first took sick. "There's a room," he heard himself saying. "Down the hall. It's empty now. The bed's made up." It had been James and Catherine's room. He kept it ready, though no one ever came. "You and the children can rest there." Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Mr. Miller, I can't. You can and you will, Samuel said firmly. That boy needs a proper bed and his mother beside him. Emma needs sleep. And you, Mrs. Hayes, need to stop swaying before you fall over. Emma stood up, still holding the Bible. Should I put this somewhere special? Samuel looked at the worn book in her small hands. Margaret's Bible, held by a child again. The table beside the chair is fine. Emma placed it carefully, reverently. Then she looked at the dust sheets again. Maybe tomorrow we could wake one up, so Mama has somewhere nice to sit. Tomorrow. The word implied staying, implied a future beyond this single night of charity. Samuel should correct her, should establish clear expectations. Instead, he found himself nodding. Maybe we could, he said softly. Thomas had fallen asleep, still holding Samuel's hand. Carefully, Samuel lifted the boy, surprised when thin arms wound around his neck, when a hot cheek pressed against his shoulder. The trust was complete, unconscious. It broke something inside him he hadn't known was still whole enough to break. This way, he said roughly, leading them down the hall he rarely traveled. The door to the children's room opened on silent hinges. He kept everything well oiled, even the unused parts. The room was exactly as it had been, except for the dust he cleaned monthly in a ritual of grief. Clara gasped softly. 2 small beds with quilted coverlets, a rocking horse in the corner, books on shelves built low for small hands. Mr. Miller. It needs using, Samuel said, laying Thomas on the nearest bed. Rooms need life in them, or they forget what they're for. Emma climbed onto the other bed, her eyes already closing. It's perfect, she murmured, like it was waiting for us. Samuel left them there, Clara sitting between the beds with one hand on each child. He closed the door softly and stood in the hallway, his hand pressed against the wood. On the other side, he heard Clara singing softly a lullaby about mockingbirds and diamond rings, the same one Margaret used to sing. He returned to the main room and looked at the dust sheets on the chairs. Emma was right. They did look like they were sleeping, and maybe, just maybe, it was time for something in this house to wake up. Samuel woke to voices that didn't belong. Children's whispers floated through the wall, punctuated by soft giggles quickly hushed. For a moment, suspended between sleep and waking, he thought it was James and Catherine playing their morning game of who could dress quietest. Then reality crashed back, and with it, the awareness that strangers slept in his children's beds. He rose from his own bed, the rope supports creaking in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the window, the eastern sky showed the faintest gray. His body knew the rhythms of ranch work up before the sun, every day for 7 solitary years. But this morning felt different. The house itself seemed different, as if it had taken a deep breath after holding it too long. In the kitchen, he found Emma standing on a chair beside the stove, studying the mechanics of the coffee grinder with intense concentration. She startled when she saw him, nearly dropping the device. I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. I wanted to help. Papa taught me to make coffee, and I thought, It's fine, Samuel said, steadying the chair. But that grinder's particular. Here, I'll show you. He demonstrated the proper angle, the steady rhythm needed. Emma watched with those 2 old eyes, nodding seriously. Mama says I'm good at learning things. I can see that. Samuel measured the grounds into the pot. How's your brother? Better. The fever broke in the night. Mama cried. She paused. Happy tears, though not the sad kind. Samuel busied himself with the stove, feeding it wood, adjusting the damper. Behind him, Emma explored the kitchen with curious fingers, opening drawers and cupboards with careful reverence. You have so many dishes, she observed, touching the blue spatterware stacked in neat rows. Are you expecting company? No? The answer came automatically. They were we used to need them all. Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. We had to sell most of ours, after Papa died. Mr. Thornton said we needed the money for Papa's debts, but Mama said Papa never borrowed anything in his life. Samuel's hand stilled on the coffee pot. Thornton. Marcus Thornton. He owns the big ranch past Cedar Ridge. Mama says he owns half the county. Emma's voice dropped. He scares me. His eyes are mean. Before Samuel could respond, Clara appeared in the doorway. She'd attempted to tidy herself, hair pinned up, dress smoothed, but exhaustion still shadowed her eyes. Emma, you shouldn't bother Mr. Miller. She's no bother, Samuel said. Coffee's almost ready, and there's sourdough starter that needs using. Clara moved into the kitchen hesitantly, as if afraid to claim space. Thomas's fever broke. I can't thank you enough. Sit, Samuel interrupted, pulling out a chair. You look ready to fall over still. She sat, and Samuel noticed how her hands trembled slightly as she folded them in her lap. Emma had returned to exploring, now examining the slate and chalk on the shelf by the door. For lessons, Samuel explained, seeing her interest. My wife, she believed in education. Mama teaches us, Emma said. Reading and numbers and history. Papa said educated children could make their own way in the world. Your papa sounds like a wise man, Samuel said, pouring coffee into 3 cups, one with extra milk for Emma. What happened to him? Clara's fingers tightened around her cup. Fever. Last September. It took him in 4 days. Her voice steadied with effort. We managed through the winter. I took in washing, mending, but then Mr. Thornton came. She paused, and Samuel waited. He'd learned patience in 7 years of silence. He said David owed him $600, showed me papers with David's signature. But David couldn't have signed them. The dates were from when he was already sick, delirious. And the signature was wrong. David made his letters sharp, precise. He was proud of his penmanship. Forged, Samuel said flatly. Clara nodded. But Sheriff Burrell witnessed them. Said he remembered David signing. Sheriff Burrell is Mr. Thornton's cousin. Samuel's jaw tightened. He knew Burrell, weak man, always looking for the easy path. What did Thornton want? The land first. Our 160 acres butts up against his spread. Good water access. When I refused to sell, he offered to let us work off the debt. She laughed bitterly. 7 years of service. He said, room and board provided, generous terms. Debt bondage, Samuel said, anger heating his voice. Slavery by another name. Mama packed us up that very night, Emma added, abandoning the slate. We climbed out the back window and ran. Clara reached for her carpet bag, hands shaking as she worked the hidden catch in the bottom. I couldn't let him take everything David worked for. She withdrew papers wrapped in oilcloth, a deed, marriage certificate, birth records. This is all I have left of my husband's dream. 160 acres he proved up himself. Every requirement met, legal and proper. Samuel examined the deed. Legitimate. Properly witnessed and filed. Good land from the description. With water rights. This would stand up in court. An honest court. There are no honest courts when Thornton owns the judge, Clara said quietly. He owns the sheriff, the bank president, half the town council. We're nobody. A widow and 2 children with $3 to our names. Thomas appeared then, padding into the kitchen on bare feet, dragging a quilt. His fever had indeed broken. His eyes were clear, though tired. Without hesitation, he climbed into Samuel's lap, settling against his chest as if he belonged there. Samuel's hands hovered uncertainly before settling on the boy's back. Thomas was already half asleep again, thumb in his mouth, trusting completely. Thomas, Clara said, embarrassed. You mustn't. He's fine, Samuel said roughly. The weight of the child was both foreign and achingly familiar. Let him rest. Emma had started setting the table, finding plates and silver as if drawn by instinct to their places. 4 settings appeared, one at each compass point of the round table. Samuel watched her work, this child making herself at home in his grief-frozen house. We'll move on today, Clara said suddenly. You've done more than enough. We'll catch the stage. Head further west." "With $3," Samuel interrupted. "And a boy just off a fever, and Thornton's men surely watching the stage stops." Clara's shoulders sagged. "Then what do you suggest?" "Mr. Miller." Samuel looked down at Thomas, sleeping against his chest, at Emma carefully arranging forks and spoons, at Clara trying so hard to maintain her dignity while her world collapsed. The smart thing would be to send them on. The safe thing would be to maintain his isolation. But anger was building in his chest, not the cold. Dead anger he'd carried for 7 years. But something hot and alive. A man using law to steal from widows and orphans. A sheriff too corrupt or cowardly to stand for justice. It was the kind of wrong that demanded answering. "You'll stay," he heard himself say, 2 weeks at least. "Until the boy's fully recovered and we can figure a safe path forward. We couldn't impose. It's not an imposition." Samuel shifted Thomas gently, the boy murmuring but not waking. "This house needs voices in it. Been too quiet too long." Emma abandoned the table settings to stand beside her mother. "We could help. I'm good at collecting eggs, and Mama can cook anything. Thomas is good at, well, he's good at being happy." Despite himself, Samuel felt his mouth quirk. Being happy is a useful skill. Clara studied his face, and he saw her reading something there, not charity, not pity, but perhaps recognition. One grieving soul seeing another. 2 weeks, she agreed softly, "and we'll earn our keep." "Ma'am," Samuel said, "from what you've told me, you've already earned it by standing up to a man like Thornton. Takes courage to run rather than submit. Takes wisdom to know when fighting direct won't work." The morning sun finally crested the horizon, flooding the kitchen with golden light. The sourdough starter bubbled on the counter, ready for the day's bread. Coffee perfumed the air. Thomas shifted in Samuel's arms, mumbling something about horses. Emma found the McGuffey reader on the shelf and clutched it like treasure. "Mr. Miller," Clara began. "Samuel," he corrected. "If you're staying, it's Samuel." "Samuel." She tested the name. "Why are you doing this?" He looked down at Thomas, at the trust in that sleeping face. Thought of James at that age, of Catherine asking endless questions like Emma did, of Margaret working at this very stove, humming while she cooked. "Because," he said finally, "a man can only live with ghosts so long before he becomes one himself. And because what's happening to you is wrong, and I've ignored wrong for too long in favor of not feeling anything at all." Clara's eyes filled with tears. She blinked back. "We won't be a burden." "Ma'am Clara, you couldn't be a burden if you tried. A burden is something that weighs you down. But for the first time in 7 years, I feel like I might float away." He adjusted Thomas in his arms. "Now, let's see about that breakfast. Emma, you want to learn the secret to proper flapjacks?" Emma's face lit up. "Yes, please." As Samuel stood, still carrying Thomas, he caught sight of the dust sheets on the unused chairs. Tomorrow, perhaps, they'd remove one, or maybe 2. After all, the house was waking up, remembering what it was for. And maybe, just maybe, so was he. The blue spatterware dishes caught the morning light as Emma set them out. The coffee grinder sat ready for the next pot, on the shelf. The slate waited for lessons that would fill the house with learning again. And in the doorway, Clara watched Samuel teaching her daughter the precise amount of starter needed for perfect flapjacks, while her son slept trustingly in a stranger's arms that were already becoming familiar. 2 weeks, Samuel had said, but looking at the way Emma laughed when the batter bubbled, the way Thomas fit against his shoulder, the way Clara's presence made the kitchen feel complete, he suspected 2 weeks would never be enough. The rooster's crow had barely faded when Samuel heard small footsteps on the porch. He opened the door to find Thomas, fully dressed but with his shirt buttoned crooked, holding a tin pail he'd found somewhere. "I want to help with chickens," the boy announced solemnly. "Emma says that's morning work." Samuel looked down at the child, noting Clara's careful mending of his worn trousers. Chickens can be particular. You sure you're up for it? Thomas nodded vigorously. I'm very brave about birds. Well then, Samuel adjusted the boy's buttons properly. Let's see how brave. They walked to the henhouse, Thomas's hand finding Samuel's as naturally as breathing. The trust still startled Samuel how quickly children decided you were safe, how completely they gave their hearts. Do they have names? Thomas asked as Samuel opened the henhouse door. Never saw the point in naming chickens. Thomas looked appalled. Everything needs a name. Otherwise, how do they know who they are? The logic was so perfectly 4-year-old that Samuel almost smiled. What would you name them? That one's Mrs. Feathers. Thomas pointed at a particularly fluffy buff hen. And that's Lady Pecksalot. And the red one is Sunrise. Samuel scattered feed while Thomas held the pail, chattering nonstop about each hen's personality based on absolutely nothing but his own imagination. When they collected eggs, Thomas cradled each one like a treasure. 16 eggs, he breathed. That's so many. Your mama and sister are making us fat with all their cooking, Samuel said. Chickens are working extra to keep up. Indeed, the past 5 days had transformed his simple meals into events. Clara had taken over the kitchen with quiet efficiency, producing miracles from his basic supplies. Fresh bread appeared daily, filling the house with yeast and comfort. She'd discovered his neglected garden and coaxed early vegetables from the soil. Even his coffee tasted better when she made it. They returned to find Clara at the butter churn on the porch, sleeves rolled up, working the dasher with practiced rhythm. Emma sat beside her with Samuel's mending basket, attempting to darn a sock with intense concentration. Mr. Samuel, look! Thomas displayed the egg basket proudly. I helped. He was very brave about birds, Samuel confirmed, which made Thomas beam. Clara smiled, never breaking her churning rhythm. Thank you for being patient with him. He's been your shadow all week. No patience needed. Samuel set the eggs on the porch rail. Boy's good company. It was true. Thomas's constant chatter filled spaces Samuel hadn't known were empty. The child's observations about clouds looking like rabbits, about beetles being very serious, about how Atlas the horse certainly understood English made Samuel see his familiar world through new eyes. That fence post is leaning, Clara observed, nodding toward the garden. I could help fix it after the butter's done. That's man's work, Samuel said automatically. Clara's eyes sparked. Mr. Miller, I've set fence posts, birthed calves, and broke a horse or two. David believed in capable partners, not ornaments. Samuel studied her, this woman who'd fled in the night rather than submit, who worked sunrise to sunset without complaint, who maintained her dignity despite having nearly nothing. Then I'd welcome the help. Emma looked up from her darning. Mama's strong. She lifted a whole tree that fell on our chicken coop once. It was a small tree, Clara said modestly, but Samuel caught her pleased smile. After the noon meal, they worked on the fence together while the children napped. Clara held the post steady while Samuel drove it deep. Her hands were small but calloused, competent. They worked in companionable silence, communicating with nods and gestures. You've done this before, Samuel observed. David taught me everything. Said a frontier wife who couldn't manage alone was a luxury we couldn't afford. She paused. He was right, though he didn't mean to be prophetic. He sounds like a practical man. He was a dreamer who learned to be practical. Clara tested the post's stability. Rather like you, I suspect. This ranch didn't build itself. Samuel thought of his younger self, arriving with Margaret full of plans. The house they'd designed together, the children they'd imagined filling it. We all start as dreamers. Some of us still are, Clara said softly. We just dream different things. That evening, after supper, Emma discovered the stopped clock on the mantel. Why doesn't it work? It stopped, Samuel said simply. It had stopped at 2:17 the moment Catherine breathed her last. He'd never wound it again. Emma studied it critically. Clocks should tick. Otherwise, they're just sad decorations. She looked at him hopefully. May I fix it? The no formed automatically, then died. Emma waited, patient as her mother, those old soul eyes understanding more than an 8-year-old should. If you're careful, Samuel heard himself say. Emma dragged a chair to the mantel, climbing up with Samuel spotting her. She wound the clock with delicate precision, and suddenly the room filled with ticking steady, rhythmic, alive, time moving forward again after 7 frozen years. There, Emma said with satisfaction. Now the house has a heartbeat. After the children were tucked in their beds, Samuel sat by the stove with his leather work, repairing harnesses. Clara appeared with her sewing basket, settling in Margaret's chair without asking. Samuel tensed, then deliberately relaxed. It was just a chair. It should be used. Your shirt's more whole than fabric, Clara observed, examining one from the mending pile. How have you managed? Carefully, Samuel admitted. Clara laughed a surprising sound, rich and genuine. Men? David was the same. He'd wear things until they literally fell apart rather than ask me to mend them. She threaded her needle. These are good quality, though. Or were, your wife chose well. Margaret had an eye for lasting things. Tell me about her. The request should have hurt. Instead, Samuel found himself talking about Margaret's insistence on real glass windows, her victory garden that fed half the county during a drought, her voice reading stories every evening. She sounds wonderful, Clara said when he finished. The children, James was 6, Catherine 4. The ages came easier now, perhaps because Thomas and Emma made them real again. Scarlet fever took them all in 1 week. Doctor said it happens that way sometimes whole families gone at once. Clara's needle paused. I'm sorry. It was 7 years ago. Grief doesn't measure time the way clocks do. They sat quietly, the clock ticking, the fire crackling. Clara's needle flashed in and out, making Samuel's threadbare shirt whole again. Her presence didn't intrude on the silence but complemented it, like harmony added to a familiar melody. Mama, I can't sleep. Emma appeared in her nightgown, bare feet silent on the floor. Bad dream? Clara asked. No, just thinking too loud. Samuel surprised himself by patting the arm of his chair. Come here. Emma climbed up beside him, curling against his side. She smelled of soap and sunshine, childhood and innocence. Mr. Samuel, do you know any stories? A few. Tell one. Samuel searched his memory, finding tales he'd told James about cowboys and wild horses, adventures and heroes. But what emerged was different, a story about a lonely mountain that thought it would stand alone forever, until birds came and built nests in its trees, and flowers grew in its meadows. And it discovered that being alone wasn't the same as being strong. Emma listened with her whole body, the way children do. When he finished, she sighed contentedly. That's a good story. The mountain was happier with friends? Yes, Samuel agreed. It was. Will you tell Thomas tomorrow he loves stories? If he wants. Emma yawned enormously. He will. Thomas loves everything you do. He told me you're better than Christmas. Clara rose, setting aside her mending. Come on, little philosopher. Bed. Emma kissed Samuel's cheek before he could react, then followed her mother down the hall. Samuel touched the spot, feeling the echo of small lips, the casual affection of a child who'd decided he was hers. Clara returned, pausing in the doorway. She's right. You know, about Thomas. He's completely besotted, follows you like you hung the moon. He's a good boy. You're good with him, with both of them. Clara moved to gather her sewing. They haven't been this happy since, well, in a long time. Clara? Samuel stood suddenly. You asked why I'm doing this. The truth is, I forgot I was lonely until you reminded me I didn't have to be. She studied him in the lamplight. We all need reminding sometimes. Later, after Clara had retired, Samuel stood in his empty parlor, except it wasn't empty anymore. Clara's sewing basket sat beside Margaret's chair. Emma's drawings decorated the table. Thomas's toy soldiers, carved by Samuel that very afternoon from scraps, guarded the windowsill. The clock ticked steadily, marking time that moved forward instead of standing still. The house smelled of bread and soap, coffee and life. Preserving jars lined the kitchen shelf, filled with Clara's early pickles. A child's laughter echoed in the walls. A woman's voice hummed lullabies down the hall. Samuel found himself planning tomorrow he'd fix the wagon wheel, and Thomas could help. Emma wanted to learn about the stars, and the McGuffey reader had a chapter on astronomy. Clara mentioned the need for a proper clothesline. When had he started thinking "we need" instead of "I need" at supper that evening? Emma had asked to sit beside him, and without thinking, he'd pulled the dust sheet off Catherine's chair. The fabric had fallen away like 7 years falling away, revealing polished wood that remembered children's hands. Spilled milk. Family dinners. "Can I sit here always?" Emma had asked. "Long as you like." Samuel had answered, meaning it. Now he looked at the 2 remaining covered chairs. Tomorrow, perhaps, or the day after. When it felt right. When the house was ready for that much life all at once. Through the window. Stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. In the henhouse, Mrs. Feathers and Lady Peck-a-Lot settled for the night. Atlas whickered softly in the barn. And in the room down the hall, 2 children slept peacefully while their mother sang soft lullabies, her voice carrying through the walls like a promise of tomorrow. Samuel banked the fire, turned down the lamp, and headed for bed. As he passed the children's room, he heard Thomas mumbling in his sleep about chickens. The sound made him smile an expression his face was slowly remembering how to form. 2 weeks, he'd said. But already he couldn't imagine the house without them. Already I had become we in his thoughts. Already the future had shifted from endurance to possibility. The clock ticked on, steady and sure, counting moments that mattered again. The pounding on the door came just after sunrise, urgent enough to send Samuel reaching for the rifle he kept mounted above the fireplace, though he left it there, unloaded as it had been for 7 years. Through the window, he saw Martha's eldest boy, Timothy, his horse lathered with sweat. Samuel opened the door to find the 15-year-old breathing hard, eyes wide with importance. "Mr. Miller, Ma sent me. Said to tell you quick there's men in town asking about a woman, a widow with 2 young ones." Behind Samuel, he heard Clara's sharp intake of breath. She'd emerged from the hallway, Emma and Thomas flanking her like small sentinels. "What kind of men?" Samuel kept his voice level. "3 of them, well-dressed, but Ma says they got hired gun written all over them. Been to every boarding house, asking at the general store, even bothering folks at church yesterday." Timothy wiped his forehead. "Sheriff Burrell's with them, looking uncomfortable as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs." "What did your Ma tell them?" "Nothing, sir. Nobody said nothing. But Ma figured you should know, seeing as you don't usually get news from town." The boy's eyes flicked curiously to Clara and the children. Samuel pulled a silver dollar from his pocket. "Tell your Ma I'm obliged. And Timothy, you never came here." The boy's eyes widened at the coin. "No, sir. Never did. Just went fishing all morning. Caught nothing worth mentioning." After Timothy galloped off, Samuel closed the door and turned to find Clara already gathering their few possessions, her face pale but determined. "We'll leave now," she said. "You've done enough. We won't bring trouble to your door. No." The word came out harder than Samuel intended, firm enough to stop Clara mid-motion. She looked at him, Emma's hand in hers, Thomas clinging to her skirt. "No," Samuel repeated, softer but no less certain. "You're not running anymore." "Mr. Miller, Samuel, you don't understand. Thornton has money, men, influence. He'll find you wherever you go." Samuel moved to the window, watching Timothy's dust settle. "Running just delays the inevitable, and sends you out there alone, vulnerable. No." "Then what do you suggest?" Clara's voice cracked slightly. "I won't let him take my children." Samuel turned from the window, decision crystallizing. "We lie." Emma's eyes widened. Papa said lying was wrong. So is stealing widows' land and forcing children into servitude, Samuel replied. Sometimes, Emma, a small lie protects a greater truth. He looked at Clara. You're my cousin. From Missouri. Your husband was my wife's brother. You came here after his death because family helps family. Clara sank into a chair. Processing. That could work, but they'll check. Let them. Martha's got a tongue that wags both ways. By noon, half the town will remember you visiting years ago. Samuel pulled paper from the drawer, along with his seldom-used pen and ink. We need documents, traveling papers. A letter from your supposed husband mentioning me. That's fraud, Clara said weakly. That's survival. Samuel began writing in a firm hand. I knew Margaret's brother's handwriting. Close enough to forge. He worked quickly, creating a letter dated 6 months ago, full of familial references and mentions of previous correspondence. Emma, can you spill some coffee on this? Carefully? Make it look traveled. Emma, catching the spirit of rebellion, deliberately tipped her cup, creating authentic-looking stains. Thomas watched with round eyes. Will the bad man take Mama away? He asked suddenly, his small voice cutting through their planning. Samuel knelt before the boy. No, Thomas. No one's taking your Mama anywhere. Promise. I promise. Samuel felt the weight of that vow settle on his shoulders. He stood, addressing Clara. We need to prepare for their visit. They'll come here eventually. The rest of the morning became a careful choreography of deception. Clara moved her few belongings into the main house, making it look lived in for weeks rather than days. Samuel aired out Margaret's good dresses, hanging them where Clara might use them. The Sunday clothes were brushed and hung prominently, a family preparing for church. Nothing suspicious. Emma, Samuel said, leading her to the barn. You need to learn to ride Atlas. The girl's face paled. He's very big. He's gentle as a lamb. But if trouble comes, you might need to ride fast. Get help from town. Emma squared her shoulders with the same determination her mother showed. Then teach me. Atlas, despite his size, seemed to understand the need for gentleness. He stood still as stone while Emma learned to mount, to hold the reins, to guide him with her knees. Within an hour, she was walking him around the corral, still nervous but competent. You're a natural, Samuel told her. Your cousin Margaret would have loved teaching you. Emma smiled at the fiction that was becoming truth. Thank you, Cousin Samuel. That afternoon, they drilled their story. Clara was now Clara Mitchell, née Miller, Samuel's father's brother's daughter. Her husband, James Mitchell, conveniently sharing a name with Samuel's son, had died of pneumonia in Missouri. The children became Emma and Thomas Mitchell. The dates, places, and details were rehearsed until even Thomas could recite that they'd traveled from Independence. Samuel showed Clara the false-bottom trunk in the bedroom, where her real documents could hide. The forged papers went into the regular drawer, easily found if searched, authentic-looking in their casual storage. What about the town ledger? Clara asked. If they check purchases. Already thought of that. Samuel produced receipts he'd been saving for years. Amazing how C. Miller could be either Clara or Catherine. And these children's clothes I bought last month, well, I knew my cousins were coming. Clara stared at him. You've thought of everything. Not everything, but enough. I hope. As evening fell, they gathered in the parlor for their new ritual, Samuel reading aloud while Clara sewed and the children played quietly. But tonight, the domestic scene had an edge of rehearsal. They were practicing being a family long reunited, comfortable in their rhythms. Samuel had removed Margaret's daguerreotype from the mantel that afternoon, wrapping it carefully in cloth and storing it in his room. In its place stood Emma's drawing stick figures, but clearly labeled Mr. Samuel. Mama, me, and Thomas, standing before a house with smoke curling from the chimney. Our family, written in careful letters across the top. It's not very good, Emma had said, embarrassed. It's perfect, Samuel had replied, and meant it. Now, as he read from Pilgrim's Progress, Thomas climbed into his lap without invitation, settling against his chest with complete trust. Emma sat at his feet, her head against his knee. Clara smiled at them from Margaret's chair. Her chair now, Samuel realized. The transformation was complete, at least visually. They looked like what they were pretending to be. After the children were abed, Samuel and Clara sat by the dying fire, planning contingencies. If they don't believe us, Clara asked, then we go to the territorial judge in the capital. Your documents are real. Theirs are forged. Thornton owns judges. Not all of them. Judge Harrison rides circuit from the capital. He's tough but fair. Doesn't like Thornton's kind of progress. Clara studied the flames. Why are you doing this? Really? Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Because I've been dead for 7 years. Your children brought me back to life. Because what Thornton's doing is wrong, and I've ignored wrong too long. Because... He stopped. Because somewhere between that first knock on my door and tonight, you became mine to protect, all of you. Clara's eyes glistened. We're not your responsibility. No? Samuel agreed. You're my choice. They sat in companionable silence, the weight of tomorrow heavy between them. Finally, Clara rose. I should check the children. Clara, Samuel stood as well. Whatever happens, you don't face it alone, not anymore. She touched his hand briefly, a butterfly connection. Neither do you. After she left, Samuel stood in his parlor, their parlor, and inventoried their defenses, not guns or weapons, but something stronger, a plausible lie, a community that might support them, and a determination born of having something worth protecting again. He pulled out the oilcloth-wrapped documents one more time, studying them in the lamplight. Real deed versus forged debt. Truth versus lie. Right versus might. David Hayes had been a smart man, getting everything properly witnessed and filed. Clara had been smarter, keeping these safe despite everything. Through the window, Samuel saw riders on the distant road, heading toward town, too far to identify. But his gut knew Thornton's men, gathering information, tightening the net. Tomorrow, probably, or the next day. They'd come. Samuel touched the rifle above the mantel. Still unloaded. Still a symbol rather than a tool. He wouldn't break his vow to never fire in anger again. But there were other ways to fight. Other weapons to wield. Truth, cleverness, community, and the fierce love of cobbled-together family. Let them come, he said quietly to the empty room. Emma's drawing smiled down at him from the mantel. Their family, worth any risk to protect. He banked the fire and headed for bed, pausing at the children's door. Both slept peacefully, unaware that tomorrow might bring the storm they'd been running from. Clara sat in the rocking chair between their beds, watching over them. Can't sleep? He asked softly. Keeping watch, she replied. Old habit. Share the watch with me now, Samuel said. That's what family does. Clara smiled in the darkness. Yes, she said. Family. The dust cloud appeared just after breakfast. 3 riders moving with the deliberate pace of men who expected no resistance. Samuel spotted them from the porch where he was helping Thomas practice his letters on the slate. Clara, he called quietly. She appeared immediately, reading his tone. They're coming. 3 riders. Take the children to the root cellar. Everything's ready, their water. Blankets, provisions for 2 days if needed. Clara's hand went to her throat. Samuel. Now, Clara, we discussed this. Emma emerged from the kitchen, dish towel in hand. One look at the adults' faces and she understood. Is it the bad men? Mama. Just a precaution, sweetheart. Clara's voice stayed steady. Remember what we practiced. You and Thomas are going to play the quiet game in the special hiding place. Thomas's lower lip trembled. I don't want to play. I want to stay with Mr. Samuel. Samuel knelt before the boy. Thomas, remember how you're brave about chickens. I need you to be brave about this too. Take care of your mama and sister for me. But who will take care of you? I'll be fine. Samuel pulled something from his pocket, a painted wooden soldier he'd carved last night when he couldn't sleep. This fellow will keep you company. His name's Courage. Thomas clutched the toy. Will you come get us when the bad men leave? The very moment. Clara had already gathered the prepared bundle food, water, candles, the deed box hidden beneath blankets. Emma took Thomas's hand without being asked. They moved quickly to the root cellar built into the hillside behind the house, concealed by climbing vines Margaret had planted years ago. The ventilation pipe is clear, Samuel told Clara as she descended the ladder. If something happens, nothing will happen. Clara reached up to touch his face. You're not alone in this. Stay down there no matter what you hear. Samuel. Her eyes held everything she couldn't say. I know, he said softly. After. We'll talk after. He secured the cellar door, arranging the vines to look undisturbed, then returned to the porch. The rifle remained above the mantel, unloaded. Instead, Samuel picked up the account ledger he'd been updating, the picture of a rancher at his morning work. The riders came into clear view, Marcus Thornton flanked by two hard-faced men Samuel didn't recognize, hired guns from their bearing, the kind who solved problems with lead. But there was a fourth rider trailing behind, and Samuel's jaw tightened when he recognized Sheriff Burrell's reluctant form. They stopped at the property line, marked by the stone cairn Samuel's father had placed 40 years ago. Thornton dismounted with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed, his black suit immaculate despite the ride. Mr. Miller, Thornton called out, not crossing the boundary yet. I believe you have something of mine. Samuel set down the ledger deliberately, stood slowly. Can't imagine what that might be. Thornton, a woman, Clara Hayes, ran off owing me considerable money. Don't know any Clara Hayes. Thornton smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Come now, Miller. She was seen entering your property a week ago, woman and 2 children, seeking shelter. My cousin visited last week, Samuel said calmly. Clara Mitchell, from Missouri. Her husband died. My wife's brother. Family helps family. How convenient. Thornton pulled papers from his coat. I have here a legal transfer of debt. David Hayes owed me $600. His widow is responsible for payment. Sheriff Burrell witnessed the original documents. Burrell shifted uncomfortably in his saddle but said nothing. Like I said, Samuel repeated. Don't know any Clara Hayes. Clara Mitchell is inside, if you'd like to speak with her, though I'd remind you this is private property. Miller, Thornton's voice hardened. I know who she is. I know what she stole when she ran documents that belong to me, and I know you're harboring a fugitive debtor. Prove it. The 2 words hung in the morning air, behind Thornton. His hired men shifted, hands moving toward their weapons, but Samuel stood steady, unarmed, unmoving. Sheriff, Thornton said without looking back, do your duty. Arrest this woman. Burrell finally spoke, his voice strained. Now, Marcus, we need actual proof. Can't just arrest folks on suspicion. You witnessed the debt papers yourself. I witnessed papers for a Clara Hayes. This man says he's got Clara Mitchell visiting. Burrell removed his hat, wiped his forehead. Without proof, they're the same woman. Thornton wheeled on his cousin. You forget who helped you get that badge. Burrell. No, sir, I don't. But I also took an oath. Can't arrest someone without cause. Burrell looked at Samuel. Would Mrs. Mitchell be willing to show her traveling papers just to clear this up? I'll ask her. Samuel turned toward the house, then paused. Though I wonder why Mr. Thornton here is so eager to collect on a debt that any reasonable man would forgive. A widow with young children, most Christian folks would show mercy. Business is business, Thornton said coldly. Samuel went inside, returning with the forged documents they'd prepared. He handed them to Burl, who examined them carefully, the letter from James Mitchell, mentioning Samuel, the traveling papers from Independence, even a receipt from a way station. These seem in order, Burl said, passing them back. Mrs. Clara Mitchell, recently widowed, traveling to stay with family. Thornton's face darkened. Those are forged. Prove it, Samuel said again. Miller, you're making a mistake. Accidents happen on isolated ranches. Fires start. Cattle disappear. Wells go bad. Thornton stepped closer to the boundary line. A man alone can't watch everything. Good thing I'm not alone, then. Samuel nodded toward the road. 3 wagons had appeared, pulled off to the side, but clearly watching. Samuel recognized Martha's husband, the Shafter brothers, Tom Croft. Not approaching, not interfering, but witnessing. Neighbors are curious folk, Samuel observed. They see riders heading to a place. They wonder what's happening. Sometimes they follow. Just to be neighborly. Thornton's jaw worked. This isn't over. Miller, that woman owes me. The only woman on this property is my cousin, and she owes you nothing. Samuel stepped to the edge of his porch. Now, you're trespassing. Sheriff, I believe that's still illegal. Burl nodded reluctantly. It is. Marcus, we should go. You'll regret this, Thornton said quietly, his voice carrying promise of retribution. All of you will regret this. Maybe, Samuel allowed, but not today. Thornton mounted his horse with sharp, angry movements. We'll be back, with proper warrants, with proof. When you have those, you'll be welcome. Until then, stay off my land. The riders wheeled and galloped off, Burl trailing behind with one backward glance that might have been apologetic. Samuel waited until they were dust on the horizon before retrieving Clara and the children from the root cellar. Thomas burst out first, launching himself at Samuel's knees. You made them go away. They'll be back, Clara said quietly, emerging with Emma. Her face was pale but composed. Yes, Samuel agreed, but we bought time. That evening, they maintained normal routines. Supper, lessons, story time, but tension thrummed beneath the surface. After the children were abed, Clara found Samuel on the porch, watching the road. Can't sleep, she asked, settling beside him on the bench, keeping watch. They might come back tonight. Try something. Then I'll watch with you. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders. Samuel, what you did today was necessary, was dangerous. You made an enemy of a powerful man. I made that enemy the moment I opened my door to you. Samuel turned to look at her in the moonlight. And I'd do it again. Why? The word was barely a whisper. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, listening to the night sounds, crickets, an owl, the wind through the cottonwoods. I had a life once, a good life. Then I lost it, and decided the safest thing was to never risk caring again, never risk loss. And now I realize I was already lost, just too stubborn to admit it. He looked at her directly. Clara, I don't want to lose another family. I don't want to lose you. Her hand found his in the darkness. You gave us home when you had every reason to keep your door closed. You stood against a dangerous man for strangers who became, she paused. Became what? Became yours. Clara turned his hand over, tracing the calluses. Somewhere between that first night and now, we became yours. And you became ours. Samuel pulled her closer, and she came willingly, her head finding the hollow of his shoulder. They sat that way, watching the road, guarding what they'd built. He'll come back, Clara said eventually. Let him. I've been running from feeling anything for 7 years. At least this fight is for something worthwhile. The children adore you. And I them. Samuel hesitated, then plunged ahead. And their mother. Clara lifted her head to look at him. In the moonlight, her eyes were silver, like that first night but without the desperation. Now they held something else, hope, perhaps, or recognition. Samuel Miller, she said softly, are you courting me in the middle of a crisis? Seems like that a problem. No, she touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered cheek. Though your timing could use work. He caught her hand, pressed it against his heart. Feel that. First time it's beat proper in 7 years. Your timing was perfect. They heard a sound on the road and both tensed. But it was just a coyote crossing in the moonlight. Clara laughed shakily. We're quite a pair, jumping at shadows. Better than being caught unaware. Samuel stood, pulling her up with him. Come on, we'll take shifts. You sleep first. I won't be able to sleep. Then rest. Tomorrow we need to be sharp. Thornton will try something else. They went inside, but Samuel noticed Clara didn't go to her room. Instead, she curled in Margaret's chair, her chair where she could see both the road and the hallway to the children's room. Standing guard over her family, Samuel checked the windows, tested the doors, then settled in his own chair. The rifle above the mantel caught moonlight, still unloaded, still a symbol rather than a weapon. But other weapons filled the room, now determination, courage, love fierce enough to fight without violence. Samuel, Clara's voice was soft in the darkness. Yes, whatever happens tomorrow. These weeks with you have been, she paused, searching for words. I know, he said. For me, too. They kept watch through the night, sometimes talking quietly, sometimes sitting in companionable silence. As dawn approached, painting the eastern sky pink and gold, Samuel heard wagons again, but this time they were coming toward the ranch, not just watching. Clara? He touched her shoulder where she'd dozed off. We have company. She woke instantly alert, but as the wagons came clearer, Samuel relaxed. It was Martha in the lead, followed by what looked like half the church congregation. What in the world? Clara breathed. Martha climbed down from her wagon, arms full of baked goods. Heard you might have trouble coming. Figured you could use some breakfast. And witnesses. Lots of witnesses. The yard filled with neighbors, setting up tables, laying out food. Children ran playing. Women gossiped. Men stood in groups discussing cattle and weather while keeping eyes on the road. A community picnic that just happened to be on Samuel's property. Thomas and Emma emerged, delighted by the unexpected party. Thomas immediately found other children to show his wooden soldier to. Emma helped set tables, natural as breathing. They came, Clara said wonderingly. Of course we came, Martha said briskly. That Thornton thinks he owns the whole county. About time someone stood up to him. Besides, she smiled at Clara, we look after family here. All kinds of family. Samuel felt something ease in his chest. They weren't alone. Win or lose, they wouldn't face it alone. The sunrise painted the mountains gold when Samuel spotted the dust cloud on the eastern road. Not 1 or 2 riders this time, but what looked like a small army. He set down his coffee cup, hand moving instinctively toward the door where Clara was helping Emma with breakfast. They're coming, he said quietly. In force. Clara's hand stilled on the biscuit dough. The neighbors who'd stayed the night, Martha and her family. The Shafter brothers. Tom Croft had slept in their wagons, maintaining their peaceful picnic vigil, but this morning felt different. Charged, like the air before a thunderstorm. How many? Clara asked. Too many to count yet. Samuel touched her shoulder. Remember what we discussed. You stay inside with the children unless... No. The word came firm and clear. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, leaving flour handprints. I won't hide. Not anymore. This is my fight. Clara. We stand together, Samuel. All of us. That's what family does. Before he could argue, Martha bustled in without knocking, her face flushed with excitement. Samuel Miller, there's quite a parade coming your way. She wasn't wrong. As the dust cleared, Samuel counted at least 15 wagons, with riders flanking them. But something was off. These weren't hired guns or Thornton's men. The lead wagon had women in it, lots of women, their Sunday bonnets visible even at a distance. What in blazes? Samuel muttered. Martha smiled, a cat with cream expression. I may have sent word to the Ladies' Auxiliary yesterday, and the Methodist Women's Circle, and the Quilting Society. Martha, what did you do? What needed doing? Every woman in this county knows what men like Thornton do to widows. We've all seen it, feared it. Some of us lived it. She straightened her shoulders. Clara's fight is our fight. The wagons pulled into Samuel's yard and ordered chaos. Women climbed down, young and old, farmers' wives and shopkeepers' daughters, even Mrs. Pemberton, the banker's wife who never socialized below her station. They wore their best dresses, carried bread and preserves, and moved with the deliberate precision of an army that fought with different weapons than guns. 8 women broke from the group, walking directly to Clara. Samuel recognized them all widows who'd lost their husbands in the last decade. Mrs. Weatherby, who'd fought off 3 attempts to seize her farm. Mrs. Chen, whose laundry business survived despite men trying to buy her out for pennies. Old Mrs. Larson, who'd faced down claim jumpers with nothing but a rolling pin and fierce determination. We stand with you, Mrs. Weatherby said simply. We've all been where you are, or might be someday. Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, Mrs. Larson replied. Just stand tall. That's all we need to do. More wagons arrived. Men Samuel barely knew, ranchers from the far valleys, shopkeepers from town, even some of Thornton's own hired hands who'd quit rather than participate in what was coming. The yard filled with witnesses, 40, 50, maybe 60 people, all here before 7 in the morning. Then came the surprise that made Samuel's jaw drop. The official-looking carriage, black with territorial seal, pulled by matched grays. The door opened, and Judge Theodore Harrison stepped out, 60 years old. Gray-bearded, ramrod straight, and famously incorruptible. Behind him, looking supremely uncomfortable, stood Sheriff Burrell. Mr. Miller, Judge Harrison said, his voice carrying across the yard. Sheriff Burrell came to me last night with concerns about potential illegal debt collection in his jurisdiction. I thought I'd better investigate personally. Samuel glanced at Burrell, who wouldn't meet his eyes but stood straighter than Samuel had ever seen him. Judge, Samuel said carefully, we're honored by your presence. Are we? The judge's eyes held humor. I suspect Mr. Thornton will be less pleased. He gestured toward the road where another dust cloud approached. Shall we prepare for his arrival? The community arranged itself without speaking, men flanking the property entrance, women forming a protective circle around Clara and the children. Judge Harrison positioned himself prominently on the porch with his traveling desk and law books. Sheriff Burrell stood beside him, badge polished, finally looking like the lawman he was supposed to be. Thornton arrived with 8 men, all armed. He pulled up short at the sight of the crowd, his face darkening as he recognized the judge. Your Honor, he said stiffly, this is unexpected. Justice often is. Mr. Thornton. Judge Harrison opened his ledger. I understand you're pursuing a debt claim. A legal matter between myself and Mrs. Hayes. Mrs. Mitchell, Clara corrected, stepping forward. The widow brigade moved with her, an honor guard in calico and cotton. Clara Mitchell. Don't play games, woman, Thornton snapped. You know who you are. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. Do you have proof this woman is Clara Hayes? Thornton produced his papers. The debt documents, witnessed by Sheriff Burrell. I witnessed documents for someone named Clara Hayes. Burl said clearly. "I've never met that woman. Mrs. Mitchell here has proper traveling papers from Missouri. Those are forged." "Prove it," Judge Harrison said mildly. "Do you have specimens of Mr. Beat Mitchell's actual handwriting to compare witnesses who can testify these documents are false?" Thornton's jaw worked. "The woman fled in the night. Innocent people don't run." "People threatened with illegal bondage do," Clara said, her voice carrying across the yard. "Mr. Thornton came to my home 3 weeks after my husband's death. He claimed debts that never existed, presented papers allegedly signed when my husband was delirious with fever. He offered to let me and my children work off this supposed debt 7 years of servitude. That's a lie. Is it?" Clara reached into her pocket, pulling out the real documents. "This is my husband's actual signature on our deed. Compare the handwriting to your supposed debt papers." Judge Harrison examined both sets carefully, using a magnifying glass from his case. The yard fell silent except for chickens pecking and the wind through the cottonwoods. "These signatures are clearly different hands," the judge announced. "Furthermore, Mr. Thornton, these debt papers are dated during the week David Hayes was documented as being gravely ill. Dr. Brennan's medical records, which I obtained yesterday, show Mr. Hayes was non-responsive during this period. Medical records can be falsified." "Are you accusing Dr. Brennan of fraud?" Judge Harrison's voice turned steel. "Because that's a serious allegation." Thornton looked around the yard at the witnesses. The judge, his cousin who'd finally found his backbone, the women standing shoulder to shoulder. His hired guns shifted nervously, clearly not paid enough to face down an entire community. "Even if those particular papers are questionable," Thornton said carefully, "the Hayes family still owes me money. David Hayes bought supplies on credit from my store." "Present the receipts," Judge Harrison said. "They were destroyed in a fire." "How convenient. No receipts, no proof of debt. Mrs. Mitchell, do you have receipts showing your husband paid his accounts?" Clara produced a leather folder. "Every receipt for 5 years. David insisted on keeping perfect records." Mrs. Chen spoke up suddenly. "I did the Hayes family washing. They always paid prompt, cash on the barrel." "They bought grain from me," Tom Croft added. "Never owed a penny. Settled their account at my shop monthly," Martha's husband called out. More voices rose, testimonies to David Hayes' scrupulous honesty, his insistence on paying debts immediately. The chorus of support grew until Judge Harrison raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Thornton, you've presented forged documents and false claims. That constitutes fraud and attempted theft." The judge stood, his presence filling the porch. "If you pursue this matter further, I'll have you arrested and tried. The penalties for debt fraud are severe, especially when perpetrated against a widow and orphans." Thornton's face had gone from red to white. "You can't prove intent to defraud." "Can't I?" Judge Harrison smiled coldly. "Sheriff Burrell was quite forthcoming about the pressure you applied to make him witness those documents. He's prepared to testify about your exact words regarding acquiring the Hayes property one way or another." Burrell stepped forward. "It's true, Marcus. I'm done being your puppet. What you're doing is wrong, and I won't be part of it anymore. You forget what I know about you, cousin." "I forget nothing. But I remember I took an oath to uphold the law, all of it, not just the parts that benefit you." Burrell removed something from his pocket, a folded paper. "My resignation, Judge. Effective after this matter is resolved. The town deserves better." Judge Harrison nodded approvingly. "Mr. Thornton, I'm ordering you to cease all harassment of Mrs. Mitchell and her family. Any further attempts to pursue these false claims will result in your immediate arrest. Is that understood?" Thornton looked around the yard one more time. His empire was built on intimidation and isolation, catching widows alone, pressing them when they had no support. But here stood Clara, surrounded by strength, backed by community, protected by law and love. "This isn't over," he said quietly. "Yes, it is," Samuel said, speaking for the first time. He stepped beside Clara, his hand finding hers. It's over. Because you've lost the only weapon you had, fear. These people aren't afraid of you anymore. We never were afraid, Mrs. Crow Larson called out. We were just alone. Not anymore. The other widows echoed her words. Then the married women joined in. Soon the entire yard rang with voices, men and women, old and young, all saying the same thing, not alone anymore. Thornton turned his horse sharply, his men following. As they galloped away, someone started clapping, then another. Soon the whole yard erupted in celebration, not triumphant, but relieved, like a collective exhale after holding breath too long. Thomas broke from Emma's grip and ran to Samuel. Did we win? Did the bad man go away? Samuel lifted the boy, settling him on his shoulders. Yes, Thomas, the bad man went away. Forever. Forever, Judge Harrison confirmed, his stern face softening as he looked at the child. I'll make sure of it. Clara stood surrounded by the widow brigade, tears finally falling as Mrs. Weatherby embraced her. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you all. We protect our own, Mrs. Chen said firmly. Always have, when given the chance. Martha bustled forward with her typical energy. Well, now that's settled. We have enough food here for a proper celebration. Emma, dear, help me with the tables. You men, move those wagons to make room. This calls for a party. The yard transformed into a celebration. Tables appeared loaded with food. Children ran playing, and someone produced a fiddle. But Samuel noticed Judge Harrison motioning him aside. Mr. Miller, a word. They walked to the fence line, away from the crowd. Sheriff Burrell told me everything, the judge said quietly. How you took in strangers, protected them, stood against a powerful man. That took courage. Just did what was right. So few do these days. Harrison studied him. Burrell's resigning. The town will need a new sheriff, someone with integrity, courage, and the respect of the community. I'm not interested in the job, Judge. I didn't say you were, but you might know someone who is. Think about it. The judge looked back at the celebration. You've built something here, Miller. Not just saved a family, but awakened a community. That's rare. That's... They returned to find Clara teaching Emma and several other girls a clapping game, while Thomas regaled a group of boys with the adventure of hiding from bad men. The widows had formed their own circle, planning what sounded like a formal society for mutual protection. The men discussed forming a cattlemen's association to prevent future land grabs. You did this, Clara said, appearing at Samuel's elbow. No, we did this. All of us. She leaned into him, natural as breathing. Samuel, I need to tell you something. Later, he said, seeing her struggle for words. We have time now. All the time in the world. As the sun climbed higher, Samuel looked across his yard, their yard full of life and laughter. The house that had stood empty and grieving now overflowed with community. The silence he'd wrapped around himself like armor had shattered, replaced by something stronger: connection, purpose, love. Mrs. Pemberton approached with her banker husband. Mr. Miller, Mrs. Mitchell, we'd like to discuss a business proposition, a joint venture between your ranches, properly incorporated, protection through legal partnership. And I'll handle the paperwork. A young man stepped forward, James Norton, newly qualified lawyer, fresh from law school back east. Pro bono, of course. It's time this county had legal representation that didn't answer to the Thorntons of the world. The celebration continued past noon. Stories were shared, plans were made, bonds were strengthened. When people finally began departing, each woman hugged Clara, each man shook Samuel's hand. They left not as neighbors, but as family, the kind you choose, the kind that chooses you back. As the last wagon rolled away, Samuel stood with Clara and the children on the porch, watching the dust settle. The crisis had passed, but something larger had begun. A community awakened to its own power. Widows no longer isolated, families no longer alone. "Mr. Samuel," Emma asked, "can we take the dust sheets off all the chairs now?" Samuel looked at Clara, who nodded with a smile. "Yes, Emma. Let's wake them all up. The house is ready for that much life now." They went inside together, their cobbled family made real through crisis and courage, and began removing every dust sheet, letting light and life flood every corner of the house that had slept too long. Spring arrived like a benediction on the valley, painting the hillsides green and gold with wildflowers Clara didn't remember planting. She stood in what had become her garden, their garden, watching Samuel and Thomas work on the new fence posts that would join the two properties legally as they'd already been joined in practice. "Papa Sam, this one's crooked," Thomas announced, his 6-year-old authority absolute. The boy had grown 2 inches over the winter, his legs finally catching up with his opinions. "Is it now?" Samuel pretended to study the perfectly straight post. "Better show me how to fix it." Clara smiled, her hands dirty from planting the kitchen garden that would feed them through the next winter. 6 months since that desperate knock on a stranger's door. 6 months since her world changed completely. "Mama, look!" Emma ran from the house, clutching the latest spring seed catalog. "They have the tomatoes Mrs. Chen recommended, the ones from China that grow sweet." At 9, Emma had become the unofficial record keeper of their expanding operation, tracking expenses and income with precision that would have made David proud. She kept the books for the horse breeding program they'd started. Atlas's bloodline proving valuable to ranchers throughout the territory. "Add them to the list," Clara said, watching her daughter make careful notes. "And the herbs Mrs. Larson suggested for her arthritis remedy." The Widows' Mutual Aid Society, formally incorporated 3 months ago, met weekly in Clara's parlor. She'd become their secretary and, more importantly, their legal advisor, self-taught but passionate about property rights and inheritance law. 3 widows had already successfully defended their holdings using strategies Clara had researched. "Mrs. Hayes Miller," Clara turned at the call, still not entirely used to the hyphenated name Samuel had suggested. "Keep the Hayes part," he'd said. "David was a good man who loved you. That doesn't disappear because you love again." Sheriff Tom Croft rode up, his badge still new enough that he polished it daily. After Burl's resignation, the town had unanimously elected the steady rancher who'd stood with them against Thornton. "Tom," Samuel called out, walking over with Thomas riding on his shoulders. "What brings you out?" "Good news. Mostly. Judge Harrison sent word Thornton's left the territory. Sold his holdings to a consortium of local ranchers. Fair prices, too." "The Cattlemen's Association?" Clara asked. "Indeed. Your idea about collective bargaining worked perfectly." Tom dismounted, accepting the water Clara offered. "Also, Burl stopped by. He's doing well, working as a clerk in Denver. Says the anonymity suits him. Sent this." He handed over a package addressed to Thomas and Emma. Inside were 2 books, adventure stories, and a note. "For the bravest children I know, thank you for reminding me what courage looks like. Can we read them tonight?" "Papa Sam," Thomas asked, forgetting his fence supervision duties. "After supper," Samuel promised, setting the boy down. "Now go tell Emma it's time to wash up. Company's coming." Indeed, wagons were already appearing on the road. The barn raising had been planned for weeks, the community coming together to build the structure that would house their expanded horse operation. But Clara knew it was more than that. It was a celebration of survival, of community, of love found in unexpected places. Martha arrived first, naturally, arms full of food and opinions. "Clara, you're too thin. All this wedding planning you need to eat." "It's a simple ceremony, Martha. Hardly planning at all." "Simple," Martha snorted. "The entire county's coming. Mrs. Pemberton has donated lace from her grandmother's collection. The Quilting Society has made you a wedding quilt with squares from every family in the valley. The ladies' auxiliary is cooking enough food to feed an army. We said simple, Clara protested weakly. You stood against Thornton, Martha said firmly. You gave us all courage. Let us give you this. By noon, the yard overflowed with people. Men worked on the barn frame while women set up tables groaning with food. Children ran everywhere. Thomas leading a pack of boys in some elaborate game involving stick horses and imaginary bandits. Clara found herself pulled aside by the Widow Brigade, as they'd come to call themselves. Mrs. Weatherby pressed a small box into her hands. What's this? Open it. Inside lay a delicate gold ring set with a small pearl. It was my mother's. Mrs. Larson explained. Passed through 3 generations of strong women. We decided it should go to you. I can't. You can and will. Mrs. Chen interrupted. You brought us together, made us strong. This ring represents all of us past, present, and future. Clara's eyes filled as she slipped the ring onto her right hand. I'll wear it with honor. The barn rose steadily throughout the day. Samuel working alongside men who'd become brothers through shared purpose. As the sun began its descent, the frame stood complete, ready for siding and roofing in the coming weeks. Fine work, Judge Harrison said. Having arrived for the occasion, he'd become a regular visitor, often bringing law books for Clara and carved toys for the children. This valley's transformation is remarkable. It was always here, Samuel replied, watching Clara organize the children for supper. Just needed awakening. After the meal, as twilight painted the sky purple and gold, Emma stood on a chair and clinked her fork against a glass, a gesture so adult it made everyone smile. I want to say something, she announced. 6 months ago, we didn't have a home. Now we have the best home ever, and the best papa ever, both of them. My first papa who watches from heaven, and Papa Sam who watches over us here. Thomas climbed onto his own chair. And we have so many friends, and chickens. Mrs. Feathers had babies. The laughter that followed was warm and inclusive. As the evening wound down and families began departing, each stopped to confirm they'd return Saturday for the wedding. Wouldn't miss it, became the common refrain. Later, with the children finally asleep after 3 stories and countless delays, Clara and Samuel stood in their parlor looking at the transformation. Every dust sheet was gone. New curtains sewn by Clara hung at the windows. Children's drawings decorated the walls alongside the single daguerreotype of Margaret and her children that Samuel had rehung with Clara's blessing. No ghosts, Clara had said when he'd hesitated. Only love remembered. Now Samuel pulled the last dust sheet from a trunk in the corner, one he hadn't opened since he'd packed away Margaret's wedding dress. Inside, wrapped in tissue, lay the dress, and beside it, his own wedding suit. You could wear this, he offered. Margaret would have liked that. Clara touched the beautiful silk. It's lovely. But Mrs. Pemberton's lace and my mother's dress pattern, that's what I want. New and old together. Like us. Samuel drew her close. Are you sure about this? Taking on a broken-down rancher and his ghosts? You're not broken, Clara said firmly. You were frozen. There's a difference. And the ghosts are welcome. They're part of who you are. And David will always be Thomas and Emma's father, always be my first love. But the heart's not limited to loving just once. She touched his face. You taught me that. They stood together in the lamplight, comfortable in their closeness. Tomorrow, the new school would open Emma and Thomas among its first students. Next week, they'd take their first horses to market. Next month, the Widows' Society would file papers to establish a mutual bank for women's ventures. Papa Sam, Emma's voice came from the hallway. I can't sleep. Bad dream. No, good dream. But I woke up and wanted to make sure it was real. Samuel opened his arms and Emma ran into them, Clara embracing them both. Thomas appeared moments later, rubbing sleepy eyes. Family hug without me, he protested, worming his way into the center. They stood there, the four of them, in the parlor where Samuel had once sat alone with his grief. Now it overflowed with life and promise. "Will we always be together?" Emma asked, the question she'd asked every night for weeks. "Always," Samuel answered, the response he gave every time. That's what family means. Saturday arrived clear and bright, the mountains wearing caps of late snow while the valley bloomed. The ceremony was held in the yard. Under an arbor of willows and wildflowers, the children had helped weave. Emma stood as Clara's witness, Thomas as Samuel's, both children beaming with importance. The minister spoke of second chances, of love that heals, of families formed by choice as much as blood. When he asked for the rings, Thomas produced them with such solemnity that several women dabbed their eyes. "Clara," Samuel said, slipping the ring onto her finger, "you brought spring to my winter. You and these children awakened a house and a heart I thought would sleep forever. I promise to love you, protect you, and stand with you. Always." "Samuel," Clara replied, her voice steady despite her tears. "You gave us home when we had none. You showed us that love doesn't diminish with sharing, but multiplies. I promise to love you, to stand with you, to build our future while honoring our past. Always." When they kissed, the entire valley seemed to cheer. Thomas announced loudly that kissing was gross, which earned more laughter. Emma just smiled, her old soul eyes bright with joy. The celebration lasted until sunset. Stories were shared of the dark days before community found its strength. Plans were made for the future, more cooperative ventures, a library, perhaps even a newspaper. The photographer from town captured the new family, and dozens more combinations the widows together, the founding members of the Cattlemen's Association, Martha with seemingly everyone. But the moment Clara would remember forever came that evening. After the guests had gone, they sat at the dinner table, the five of them. 5 places set, 5 chairs filled. Samuel at the head, Clara to his right, Emma and Thomas on either side, and at the foot, a place set with David's photograph and a single candle. "To family," Samuel said, raising his glass of cider. "All of it, past, present, and future." "To family," they echoed. Thomas had named the 5th chair Papa David's place. Matter of fact in the way children accept complex truths. It would be set for holidays and special occasions, not a shrine, but an acknowledgement. Love remembered, love continuing, love expanding to encompass all. Later, as Clara and Samuel stood on their porch watching the stars wheel overhead, she asked, "Any regrets?" "Only one," Samuel said. "I wish I'd opened that door sooner." "You opened it exactly when you were meant to, when we needed you, when you needed us." From inside came the sound of Emma reading to Thomas, her voice clear and confident. The clock ticked steadily, counting moments that mattered. The house breathed with life, every room awake and purposeful. "What are you thinking?" Clara asked, seeing Samuel's distant expression. "That broken hearts can mend, that closed doors can open, that even the longest winter eventually yields to spring." He pulled her closer, and that sometimes, when you think your story's ended, it's actually just beginning. The mountains stood eternal guard while the valley slept. In the barn, horses whickered softly. In the henhouse, Mrs. Feathers and her chicks roosted peacefully. And in the house that had waited so long to live again, a family complicated, beautiful, chosen, and true settled into their new beginning. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, but here on earth, in this small corner of the frontier, love had rewritten the patterns of grief into something new. Not erasing the past, but incorporating it into a future none of them had imagined when a desperate woman knocked on a lonely man's door on a cold winter night. The beginning was an ending, the ending, a beginning, and in between, the miracle of hearts brave enough to open, strong enough to heal, and wise enough to know that family is not just what you're born into, but what you choose to build. Samuel Miller spent 7 years believing his heart had died with his family, building walls of solitude that seemed unbreakable. Clara Hayes fled into the night with her children, running from a man who would steal their freedom through forged documents and false debts. Neither expected that a desperate knock on a frozen door would transform not just their lives, but awaken an entire community to its own strength. This story reminds us that family isn't only blood, it's the hands that reach out when we fall, the voices that speak up when we're silenced, the hearts that make room when we have nowhere to go. Samuel learned that protecting his heart from loss meant losing everything worth living for. Clara discovered that accepting help isn't weakness but wisdom. Together, they proved that gratitude isn't just saying thank you, it's opening our lives to others and letting them open theirs to us. The widows standing together, the community facing down Thornton, the neighbors who became family, all show us that injustice thrives in isolation but crumbles before united compassion. Have you ever witnessed someone being falsely accused of debts they didn't owe, or seen powerful people trying to take advantage of someone's vulnerability after a loss? How did the community respond, or how should they have responded?